do you remember decades ago, a movie, perhaps you've watched the reruns of the Gremlins. It was a movie that was produced by Steven Spielberg about these cute little cuddly things that wreak havoc into a community. And I was so intrigued when I read this blog by the person I'm going to be talking with today, who compared the Gremlins to that inner critic within each and every one of us. You know, those thoughts that jumble up inside of our head and can throw us off kilter and get us down the wrong path if we listen to them. We're going to be talking with Terry McDougall, who will share with us how we can kind of calm that inner critic within each and every one of us, how we can retrain them as well. Terry McDougall has a long career as a corporate marketing executive. She's now a full-time executive and career coach, working with high-achieving professionals to help them remove obstacles that keep them stuck so they can enjoy more success and satisfaction in their lives and career. She's the author of a book called Winning the Game of Work, and also the host of the marketing podcast called Marketing Mambo. So please help me welcome Terry McDougall.
Welcome to the Energize Your Life podcast, hosted by keynote speaker, author, and peak performance expert, Dr. Joe. Listen in as Dr. Joe and her guests talk about how to energize your life so you can be happier, healthier, and more productive.
All right, so welcome, Terry. Welcome to the show.
Well, Dr. Joe, thanks for having me. I'm excited about our topic today.
I am too, because I read your blog about Ralph and I so much identified with him and I could actually picture him. So for those of all of you that haven't, read the blog, Terry, tell us a little bit about Ralph.
Well, Ralph is my gremlin. And the gremlin is that little voice in your head that is constantly nitpicking or criticizing or reminding you of things. And, I like to think of it sort of like as the little devil on your shoulder, but one that's whispering sometimes mean things into our ear. And, the funny thing about anyone's gremlin and Ralph is that Ralph doesn't whisper these things in my ear to be mean. He whispers these things in my ear to keep me safe.
He's trying to protect you.
Yes, he is. Mm-hmm. He is.
So Terry, you had in the blog referred to Ralph as kind of like, but not like Gizmo. Can you tell us a little bit about Gizmo? I remember the movie a long, long time ago, but maybe some people don't remember.
Well, as I mentioned, that little voice, that little can be a little mischievous. I call it a gremlin. And maybe a lot of people remember that movie back from the 1980s called Gremlins. And
did it go that far back? 1980s?
I think so.
Oh my gosh, it's old. I know. I remember it.
Yeah, but for people who haven't seen it, it's about these little creatures that are just really cute. They're small and they're fluffy and adorable, but under certain circumstances, they can become quite destructive. Yes. And, one of the things that you were not supposed to do with gremlins in the movie is expose them to light or get them wet. Or I can't remember all of the rules.
And you can't feed them after midnight.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I made the connection between the movie and my own gremlin because if you don't sort of shed light on the little voices, what the little voice is telling you, and then it can become very toxic.
Yes.
And as I was saying earlier, those little voices, sometimes we believe them. The little voice may say, oh, you're fat, or you could never have that, or you're not good enough for this. And we tend to believe it, and we tend to believe that is the truth, when in fact, it's just a thought. And that when we shine light on that and we create some separation between ourselves and those voices, we start to realize that that's a coping mechanism that tries to keep us safe. But the reality is that often there's nothing that we need to be protected from, or the risk that we're, deep down inside fearing is pretty small. And the upside might be way higher than the potential downside, but yet
Mhm.
we can become frozen by listening to that voice. But if we shine light on it, it goes away. But if we
Yeah.
feed it, I mean, I'm sure many of us have laid in bed at night and, let the scenarios run in our head and have
Mhm.
catastrophized, oh, if I do this, this might happen, and all of that. And we've got to have the discipline not to feed those things after midnight or any other time. When things are dark and we're by ourselves, a lot of times we tend to listen to those voices more.
And
And
let's
we,
face it, a lot of us are stuck, working remotely. We don't have that same kind of interaction. And perhaps you saw that study that just came out. The American Psychological Association just did a survey of, I think, about 3,000 adults and asked them how they were coping through the pandemic. And about 2/3 of them said that they unintentionally gained weight, some lost, more alcohol use, and the weight gain was like close to 2 pounds a month on the average, some gaining as much as 50 pounds. And they're probably not gaining the weight because they're just partying it up and having a lot of fun. It's more that they're eating because of stress. And let's face it, where does that stress and anxiety come from? Well, it comes from Ralph, who is sitting on our shoulder and telling us how bad things are. So
yes.
how can we quiet Ralph? And I probably should add, we are not our thoughts. And many of those things that Ralph is saying to us, we say they're our thoughts, but let's face it, they probably came from somewhere else, right?
Yeah,
Some other
absolutely.
people, like maybe
Yes.
our parents or other influential people. So how can we quiet Ralph down? How can we put him in his place? Because he does serve a purpose for us, correct?
Sure, he definitely does. And really, the first step is to name him. You don't have to name him Ralph. That's just the name of my gremlin. But part of the reason why I recommend to people that when you hear those little voices, give it a name because it separates it from
Mhm.
you. I'm Terry, he's Ralph, right? So if I
Mhm.
start hearing those voices in my head, I can say, Ralph, quiet down,
Yeah.
go lay under the table, right? I don't need you
Mhm.
right now. That's kind of the first step, because it does provide that separation. Another thing that you can do is just try to tolerate that voice. A lot of times people will say, just let your thoughts flow, almost like,
Mhm.
laying out in a field looking at the clouds floating by overhead.
Right.
We don't
Mhm.
have to react to our to the thoughts and the things that we're saying to
Right.
ourselves. We can
And
let them
I don't,
go.
Terry, I don't know if you practice yoga, but that is something that is strongly encouraged in yoga, is just to, you can recognize those thoughts, but like you said, let it go, like a leaf, flowing down a stream, the clouds. I love that analogy. But yeah, they're there, you acknowledge them, but you don't have to give it energy.
Exactly. And I think that we were talking before you hit record about that survey. And I really believe that overeating and drinking a lot of times comes from people's anxiety and feelings that they have to take action in some way. And
Mhm.
during the pandemic, there hasn't really been a lot of productive action that we can take. We feel cooped up, we feel maybe lonely, we might feel stressed because we're not getting the reinforcement or validation of being able to see our boss in the office, that kind of thing. And
Mhm.
so in order to quell the anxiety or that feeling of having to take action, a lot of times we just comfort ourselves by going and grabbing a handful of Oreos or having a drink while we're watching Netflix. And
Mhm.
that's okay to do sometimes, but I think that because of the length of the lockdown over the past year, that it's a lot of these habits have become more entrenched.
Yes, I think,
But
we call it, at dietitians, we call it stuffing our emotions. In other words, not not recognizing what it is that we're feeling, but trying to put something in our mouth and our body so that we don't feel it. And there's nothing wrong with feeling it, but how do you encourage people to be a little bit more tolerant of these thoughts, to live with them? Because let's face it, they're going to be with us all the time. We can't stop it completely.
Yes. Well, I think, that, as I said, that first step is separating ourselves from that voice and recognizing that's not Terry talking, that's Ralph talking. And then being a little more thoughtful and critical about what you're hearing, and maybe saying, for example, sometimes people might feel like, oh, I didn't hear from my boss. I haven't heard from my boss for a week and I'm going to get fired. Right. So because that is a belief that's within them, or a fear that's within them, they start to respond emotionally to that belief. So, maybe there is fear, maybe there's anxiety, and because of the anxiety, they're taking these other actions to quell that. But where the change can be made is in being a little more critical about, is that really true? Is that really true? Like, what's the likelihood that I'm going to get fired? What are other reasons why maybe I haven't heard from my boss this week? Maybe they took time off. Maybe they're sick. Maybe they're just busy, right? But being able to sort of think about what other reasons might be besides just, buying these beliefs whole hog.
Yes. Many of us think about those worst case scenarios of what it could possibly mean rather than the best case scenario.
Yeah. When we can identify, first of all, and then replace beliefs with something else, that can help us be more tolerant, to feel calmer, to be happier. And it's really important for us to be thoughtful. I mean, it sounds a little bit meta, be thoughtful about our thoughts, and to recognize that we actually have control over what we think and how we respond to our thoughts. And, as a coach, a lot of times I see people say, well, I can't really control that. This happens all the time. And they make themselves feel guilty for responding. And the first thing I say is that you're doing a great job of keeping yourself safe. You've developed these coping mechanisms because it has kept you safe up until now. And you can also recognize that it's a high energy way of keeping yourself safe. It's more than what you need. That you can maybe back off a little bit and say, what's really required here? Is this a life or death situation? Do I really need to be hyper vigilant about this? Or can I say, you know what, even if I do get fired, I have good skills and I'll be able to find another job. Or maybe I need to just call my boss and make sure that he's okay or she's okay with what I've been doing. But instead, a lot of times we just kind of go down this rabbit hole, and, one fear can be compounded by another. And, next thing you know, we're thinking that we're going to lose our house and we're going to get divorced. And, and I'm like, just don't go there. Okay. Like, maybe think about what's the most likely case of what's going on, not worst case.
Right. And I'd love to hear about some coping skills that you have taught, or maybe others have taught you, because sometimes the best solutions I've come up with are ones that other people have shared with me. Like, obviously journaling. People sometimes journal first thing in the morning, kind of get those worries off their mind. So it's not dwelling, they can say, I've written it down. I don't need to dwell about it. Some people journal at night so they can kind of clear their mind before going to bed. The most unusual story that I heard was a woman who found herself with that Ralph just, talking, screaming in her ear every single time she was in a critical conversation with somebody. And it happened to be a superior, but not even of her department. He just made her very nervous. And, Ralph would start chattering in her ear and just destroy her self-confidence. And she said, I wanted to cry. And she said, that is the worst thing I can do in the workplace. So she would repeat to herself, I can cry at 5. I can cry at 5. And that was her mantra that she used to remind herself it is okay to have these emotions, but not right now. We're going to have them at 5:00. And she said, and she actually did initially cry at 5. And then after a while, she realized that was, she didn't need to cry at 5. She just needed to give herself permission to cry if she wanted to. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I've often run across people who will say, I want to do X, but I can't because of Y. And I want people to recognize that you are always at choice. And, you're the person who shared that story. She could have cried then if she wanted to, right? We can do anything we want at any time. It doesn't mean there's not going to be consequences, but sometimes, just much like that situation, just telling ourselves, you know what, I have choices here and I can decide what I want to do. Sometimes that's enough to make us feel like, oh, there's a little more space to maneuver in.
Yes.
But the things that might help, I mean, you've named some of them, just exercise, getting enough sleep, self-care, being very good about sort of thought hygiene, recognizing when you're telling yourself something that feels really harsh or feels really, dangerous or whatever. And maybe in a time when you're calmer, think about, when I have that thought, what do I want to replace it with? And it could be, I'm good enough, or I'm safe. Whatever it is, but you can even talk with somebody to say, like, when I have this thought, what's something I could replace it with that's more likely and more positive? One of the other things that I recognize a lot is that sometimes people, and I sort of alluded to this earlier, sometimes people will say that they know what they want, but they'll immediately kind of pile on with why they can't have it. And, so it might be, I really want another job, but I'm too old to look for another job, or I would need to go back to college to be qualified for that. And I tell people to separate these things. Get clear on what you want and allow it to live and breathe and have some life. And even start telling people about the things that you want. And then separately, think about, how can I get it? Because so often people interweave those two things, and the negativity of the reasons why you can't have the thing that you want overwhelms the little fledgling idea that you really want. And so separate those things. They don't have to be together. And, if you want to do something, it doesn't mean you have to do it tomorrow. You could do it 5 years from now, but allow it to live, because it's going to make it much more likely that you're going to get it. And a lot of things that we've talked about here, even from a fear standpoint, starting to envision that, maybe someone's afraid of being a public speaker or something like that. You can set small goals for yourself about, I'm going to set the goal for myself to ask one question in the next staff meeting. Just start with baby steps. That's absolutely fine. And we can also enlist Ralph in being a more positive voice for us. We can say to Ralph, Ralph, it's not helpful for you to say these negative things to me all the time. What I'd like you to do is notice when I do good things and say something positive to me. So it could be, like in Ralph's.
So you're retraining Ralph, basically.
Yes.
That's a great idea. For those of you who are listening, I think I need to break away for just a moment and remind you that, how like with those gremlins, when we do those 3 things, we get them wet, we expose them to light, we feed them after midnight, they go crazy. Well, you know what? I think when it comes to our inner critic, the same thing applies. When we do not have really good energy, we haven't had a good night's sleep, we're eating junk all day, we haven't pulled away from the desk all day long. Well, when our energy is low, we're much more likely to succumb to what that inner critic is saying to us. And so they can really destroy our day. So let me ask you right now, have you taken my 10-question energy quiz? If you haven't, it's real simple, just 10 quick questions. Go to drjoe.com/energy quiz. So Dr. Joe is just 4 letters, DRJO, drjoe.com/energy quiz, 10 quick questions. And then you'll get my 21 ways to beat the afternoon slump. These are just quick tips to help you keep up your energy all day long. And hopefully you won't listen to Ralph so much. All right, let's get back to the interview. I just love that imagery associated with it. Although I was scared to death of that movie, Gremlin. Even, so you said it was 1980. So I was an adult at the time. And I just remember thinking, that was really scary. Maybe it seemed too real. I don't know.
Well, I think that it's sort of like those movies where like the doll becomes a killer or something like that, because it's
Yes,
something that we're usually attracted to. The Gremlins are so cute. They were like
they
small
are.
and fuzzy with big eyes. They're like little,
Mhm.
almost like puppyish.
Yes.
But then they could just turn into something really, really destructive and evil if you didn't treat them well. And I think that that's a great analogy for what our own Gremlins can do. We can, if we treat them right and we train them correctly, they can
Mhm.
be our best advocate. If we let them run wild, they can make our life a living hell. and
That
it's
is
our
a
choice.
Right. It is our choice. I love that. That is a great way to end the podcast. I will put in the show notes the link to that blog, Terry. And in addition, I've got a link to a couple of podcasts that I think tie into this. One is about energy affirmations, the whole use of affirmations. Plus, I've got a blog on affirmations. Um, Dr. Gazan also talked to us about internal motivation, and I think that ties into all that. So I'll put that all in the show notes. Make sure you look at that and click to that. But Terry, for those people who want to reach out to you and learn more about what you do, how can they locate you?
Well, they can find me at my website, which is terrybmcdougall.com. I'm also active on LinkedIn, and my handle there is Terry B. McDougall. And finally, I have a book, and I wrote about Ralph the Gremlin in my book, and it's called Winning
Oh,
the Game of Work, Career Happiness and Success on Your Own Terms. And that's available on Amazon.
okay, winning the game of work. All right. And for those of you who want to know how to spell it again, refer to the show notes, and I'll have all of those links there. So thanks, Terry, for being on the show, and we'll talk to you all next week.
Thanks, Joe.
Bye.